I mean, what this government does is spends money, destroys our energy system and erodes productivity. That's been the consistent record of the Albanese government since it first began. And there's no sign whatsoever that the government is going to rethink its energy policy. There's no sign that they're going to remove their tax on unrealised capital gains. There's no sign that they're going to reverse their workplace relations changes. There's no sign that they're going to roll back the wave of unskilled migration, which is driving productivity down. So I think this is really an exercise in futility.
2025 is a year of change. Cultural and political disruption is transforming our nation and the global order. The rebellion against the establishment has accelerated. Australia and the Western Alliance is now at a crossroads. Either the mainstream will continue its ascendancy or the elites will prevail. Hello, Tony, and g'day to all of our viewers and listeners. Great to be back. Today we'll be discussing the productivity roundtable, Israel, Palestine and Putin-Trump meeting, plus taking 4 or 5 of your questions which came through. Looking forward to that. Tony, great to be back with you.
Thanks, Dan. Nice to be here.
All right, let's talk about the productivity roundtable, which is upon us this week to be held in Canberra. Now, we're told that this is going to be the government and Albanese and Jim Chalmers putting forward their ideas of how to get Australia growing and get our economy going forward again. You've been around the traps a lot. You've been in politics for many years. You've seen these summits come and go. What's your assessment of what we might see out of this productivity roundtable?
Look, it's just a giant PR exercise. It's an attempt to recruit others, particularly people in business, to the government's statist agenda. What this government does is spends money, destroys our energy system and erodes productivity. That's been the consistent record of the Albanese government since it first began. And there's no sign whatsoever that the government is going to rethink its energy policy. There's no sign that they're going to remove their tax on unrealised capital gains. There's no sign that they're going to reverse their workplace relations changes. There's no sign that they're going to roll back the wave of unskilled migration, which is driving productivity down. So I think this is really an exercise in futility, but I guess it will give Anthony Albanese and his ministers a few days of positive headlines, and people who don't think deeply about our public life might be inclined to think that the government is doing something. But the truth is, we are drifting back as a country. We are sapping our economic strength, and nothing that is likely to happen at this conference is going to change that. The worst thing that happened last week, which should have sent alarm bells ringing everywhere around Australia, was the announcement by the head of Chevron that some $100 billion of planned future investment in gas here in Australia is not going to go ahead. And that's because this government has a dead set against fossil fuels, even though our prosperity depends absolutely on the fossil fuels that this government hates. Our 3 biggest exports are iron ore, coal and gas. It's ideologically opposed to 2 of them and indifferent to the 3rd. So we're in a bad way, and it's going to get worse.
Well, exactly right. And I think there's a couple of things. We were just talking before, Tony, and you had a good assessment about, you've got your book coming out shortly about Australian history, which I'm really looking forward to that being released to the public. And you were sort of making the point that our first 100 years were outstanding as a nation or as a colony. And then, we've had challenges, depression and so forth, and it picked up and has now gone backwards again. Just talk us through that, because I thought it was really interesting.
Well, if you look at Australia's settled history from 1788, our first 100 years were spectacularly successful. We were a colony of outcasts among outcasts, and yet by the 1880s, we had the world's highest standard of living, and we were leaders in political freedom. We pioneered democracy in this country long before women had the vote, or most men had the vote in Britain women and men had the vote here in Australia. So we did spectacularly well because we had this absolute have-a-go attitude, and we made the most of our natural blessings, first with the extraordinary pastoral expansion of the 1820s, 30s, 40s, then with the gold rush and the mining expansion of the 60s, 70s and 80s. We built railroads, we built irrigation schemes. Marvellous Melbourne was the second city of the British Empire. It really was a wonderful, exuberant time. Then the stuffing was knocked out of us by the depression of the 1890s, which was worse in Australia than anywhere else, and the Great War. The 1920s were a funereal decade. We became extremely statist across two world wars. But then in the 1950s and 60s, we started to get our mojo back. Partly it was the post-war immigration program that brought people to this country who, like the early settlers, really wanted to have a go and make the most of things. They were very much encouraged to integrate from day one and to assimilate down the track. The Hawke Howard years were great years for our country, arguably the two best governments we've ever had. But I've got to say, since 2007, we've been drifting backwards. And it's just getting worse under the current government. It's really getting worse under the current government. When it comes to the economy, they are completely clueless. And that is going to be absolutely on display over these 3 days.
Yeah, well, and I think also when we look internationally, there are also troubling signs as well. And we've just had the meeting between Trump and Putin and also Zelensky taking place. And of course, this has been an ongoing matter. Trump says he wants to get a peace deal. We'll see how that goes. But interested in your assessment of the international situation as it pertains to the Russia-Ukraine matter.
Well, Dan, I probably should begin by saying that one of the few encouraging things that this government has said recently is the Prime Minister's statement yesterday, reiterating something he said some months ago, that Australia would be prepared to contribute to some kind of a stabilisation force in Ukraine. And I think we certainly should be prepared. I think it's entirely in keeping with our tradition of military support for the cause of justice and freedom abroad, stretching back 120 odd years. So look, if the war is to end with an absolute cast iron Article 5 NATO type security guarantee for Ukraine, with the presence of a serious foreign military force on Ukraine's borders, that probably, under all the circumstances, would be the best feasible outcome. Unless the West is going to give Ukraine vastly more long-range weaponry than it's been prepared to so far, it is regrettably probably impossible for the Ukrainians to force the Russians to surrender the territory they have so far occupied. But if rump Ukraine can be guaranteed by the presence of serious Western troops, that's a good outcome, because Putin will have manifestly failed in his ambition. And if there were, for argument's sake, a serious Anglo-French force supported by countries like Australia on the ground in Ukraine, that would make it practically impossible for Putin to resume his aggression. So if this is what happens, not a bad outcome, but we've had a lot of false starts here. I think all we can say today is that there's been some encouraging moves.
Anything in particular about the Zelensky, who's recently been meeting with Trump in the White House? Any perspective on that, or how that might pan out?
Well, certainly the meeting we've just had seems to have been far more good-natured than the awful meeting, the Oval Office meltdown of February, which was a terrible day for democracy. It really was. To see the leader of the free world berating the world's current greatest freedom fighter, I thought was just the most woeful spectacle, the most dismal thing I've seen in years. But it seems that President Trump has perhaps become disillusioned with the Russian tyrant and is perhaps more of a realist about what needs to be done if a reasonable outcome is to be obtained.
Mm-hmm. And one of the other pressing matters on the international scene is, of course, Israel-Palestine matter. And we've had the Australian government recently say it's going to recognise Palestinian statehood, along with a number of other nations around the world. Now, to me, this appears to be purely driven by craven domestic political considerations that we've discussed in the past, and also, I guess, an anti-American ideology that exists within sections of the Labor Party that is now, in a very troubling fashion, in the ascendancy. But interested in your perspective on that decision taken by this government.
Well, Dan, you won't be surprised that I dislike it deeply. If you go back to the early 70s, the Whitlam government, reversing decades of strong Australian support for Israel, adopted a position of even-handedness as between the Israelis and the Palestinians. This was fiercely criticised by the then ACTU president, Bob Hawke, who said back in 1973 that if the bell tolls for Israel, it doesn't just toll for Israel, it tolls for all mankind. So I think it was a big mistake to indicate imminent recognition of Palestine. It looks to be a reward for terrorism. I think what the government should have said, and what countries like Britain and France should have said, is that we would only be prepared to recognise Palestine if there is a clear renunciation by Hamas and the Palestinian Authority of terrorism in all its forms, the demilitarisation of Hamas, the disarming of Hamas, an acceptance by Hamas of Israel's right to exist behind secure borders, and an immediate release of the hostages. I mean, the idea that we would recognise Palestine when Hamas is still holding some 20 living Israeli hostages, I just think it's reprehensible, absolutely reprehensible. How can you reward this death cult? How can you acknowledge a statelet which, to the extent that it has a government of terrorists? I just don't think you can.
I think one of the disappointing parts about this government now is it's clearly the worst form of a Labor government, which is a Labor government dominated by sectional interests and basically a sock puppet for those interests. I mean, you mentioned Bob Hawke. He was imperfect, but he was able to overcome the natural tendency of Labor, which is to devolve into narrow sectional interests. And just as at the very time that Labor is at the height of its modern powers, it's also regressing to its worst form, which is whether it's the ACTU, whether it's the Palestinian lobby, whether it's these other, superannuation funds. It's basically a sock puppet for these interests. And I just think the next 3 or 6 years are going to be very tough for our country with that kind of government.
Well, that's why it's absolutely vital that the Liberal National Coalition recover its mojo fast. There is plenty of work for the coalition to do, and this is a potential target-rich environment should the coalition regain its vigour and its conviction. Courage, character, and conviction are what we need more of in our public life, and starting with energy policy, which we've discussed time and time again here. The idea that we can continue to drive productivity while at the same time putting our energy costs through the roof and reliability through the floor. Energy is the economy, as we have been saying. You cannot run a first world economy on solar panels and batteries. You just can't. And yet that's what Labor wants to do. We had the Prime Minister saying today that this is an energy transition akin to a second industrial revolution. It is a de-industrial revolution. That's what it will be. if Labor has its way.
Well, exactly right on that front, so we can return to that. And I think we've got a couple of questions from the audience on that matter. So I wanted to turn to those questions now because we had dozens of questions come in. So I've picked the ones that I think are most interesting and thought-provoking. So I wanted to start with my favourite one, which says, it is so good to listen to a man who understands the times and clearly presents a logical way forward for our nation. Now, I think he's talking about you, not me, but it could be me. I'm not sure. Our country could certainly use a man like Tony. So my question for Tony is, would you consider coming back into Parliament? So that's the first one that we received. So are you going to come back into Parliament?
Well, Dan, the short answer is it's highly, highly unlikely. Obviously, I haven't lost my passion for politics. I haven't lost my enthusiasm for political combat. But I think that if I were to go back into Parliament right now, I would be a complication for my colleagues, and that's not what I want to be. I think at the moment, the best thing I can do is try to be a help and an inspiration from outside the Parliament. And I'm very pleased that our listener, Brian, enjoys our conversations, and hopefully Brian is a member of the party, and hopefully he is pushing for people like you, Dan, to take up the torch that I did my best to carry forward in earlier years, because that's what we need. I mean, we need a strong pipeline of good people going into public life. That's what we need. And rather than recycle people from yesterday, however eminent, what we need is a pipeline of good people going forward. And best thing anyone can do right now, who is worried about the future of our country, is join the political party of their choice and make it better. That's what we need.
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree. Thank you. So this one's from Wilson. It goes to the treaty process underway in Victoria, so-called treaty. How can we stop the Victorian government from bringing in a treaty by stealth? Well, it's not really by stealth. They're doing it out in the open. What can the Victorian opposition do to stop it?
Not much. They've got to win an election. They've got to win an election. And one thing that I think would help them to win an election is by vigorously opposing this, because it's just wrong for a people to make a treaty with itself. Treaties exist between sovereign entities. They don't exist between state governments and minority groups of citizens. That's not a treaty. And to suggest that it is a treaty is to imply strongly that the Aboriginal people living in Victoria are somehow superior with special status above and beyond that of everyone else. And so I think this is a really bad move, and it's, I guess, an attempt to do under the table, as it were, what the Australian people in every state, including Victoria, overwhelmingly rejected when we had the referendum in 2023.
The Victorian opposition has said they oppose the treaty, but they're not going to campaign against it. So it'll be the worst of both worlds, which is those who want you to oppose it will not get behind you because you're not doing anything about it. And those who support a treaty will dislike you because you're opposing it. So you've got to do one thing or the other, not this sort of thing, we oppose it, but we're not going to make a big thing of it.
Exactly right. Be ye hot or be ye cold, for as ye are lukewarm, I will spit ye from my mouth, as I think the book of Revelation says at one point. I mean, don't be lukewarm. Don't be bland. Don't be beige. Be something.
Be something.
Stand for something, and fight for what you stand for.
Yeah, exactly. So this question is from, I don't have the name on this one, sorry, but this one is about superannuation and housing problems. So it starts off talking about mass migration, putting housing under the pump, and that superannuation funds are increasing their exposure to housing and high-rise apartments, and is basically asking whether there is an issue with this. Should this involvement of superannuation funds in the housing sector be limited in some way? But I guess it goes to a broader thing about superannuation funds and what their role is.
Well, I've never been a fan of compulsory superannuation, Dan, and frankly, in a perfect world, I'd say to the public, look, you can continue putting your 11.5 or whatever it is percentage into superannuation, or if you think you could look after that money better yourself, you can keep it. You can keep it. It's your money. It's not the government's money. It's not the super fund's money. It's actually yours. So that's, if you like, a general point about compulsory super. I would stop it from being compulsory. As for investing in housing, look, the superannuation funds should be free to make what they think are the best commercial investments. If they think this is a good commercial investment, fine, but they should be doing it to the extent that they are for good commercial reasons, not because the government is bullying them or coercing them to invest in so-called social housing.
Well, I think we've got time for one more here. And this is from Chris. Chris says, love the podcast, watch every episode. Chris lives in Sydney, just around the corner from Tony.
Oh, wow.
So you've got a question from a neighbour here. While the political difficulty of taxing the mining and resources sector is clear, as per the Rudd Gillard's failed resources rent tax, it's hard to ignore that everyday Australians appear to be missing out in a country so rich in natural resources. So Chris asks about why hasn't the government implemented an East Coast gas reservation policy like they do in WA? If it were serious about easing cost of living pressures, wouldn't it prioritise practical measures over renewable energy projects with delayed benefits?
Well, look, there's a bit in that. I think it's wrong to suggest that the mining companies are not paying tax. They are paying a massive amount of tax. They pay billions and billions and billions in tax, both to state and federal governments. So this idea that somehow the mining companies are taking us for a ride, I don't see any evidence for that. And if we want to continue to enjoy a high standard of living with high wage jobs and with well-funded government services, we need more mining, not less mining. As for a gas reservation policy, look, I would have no big problem with a government saying of new mineral developments or new gas fields that let's say 10% of that has got to be reserved for domestic use. I think that's fair enough for new developments, but to impose a gas reservation policy on existing gas fields, I think would be akin to changing the rules after the game has started. I think that would be grievously unfair, and it would be exactly the kind of policy that would stop new developments, a la Chevron, saying that they're not going to go ahead now with $100 billion worth of new investment. I think it's urgent that we get more gas out of the ground at express speed. We've got plenty of gas in the ground, particularly here in Victoria, which for a whole lot of green ideological reasons we aren't exploiting. But that is the answer to our gas problem. Not a reservation, but just more gas. So let's get more gas out of the ground at express speed. Let's keep what we need in Australia, sure, but let's export as much as we possibly can, because A, the world needs it, and B, we need the money.
Well, exactly. Look, we'll leave it there, Tony. So great list of questions coming through. And if you do have a question, please send it through to me, dwild@ipa.org.au. Can't guarantee we'll get to all of them, but we will get to some of them. So, Tony, thanks again for your time, and see you in about a fortnight.
Thanks, Dan.
This is a production of the Centre for the Australian Way of Life at the Institute of Public Affairs. To find out more, visit australia.ipa.org.au.